Rome is too vast for one man to govern. We must divide the power so that we may save her. To save Rome, we must first divide her. From this day forward...
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we re-diving deep into one of history's most fascinating and tumultuous periods, the twilight of the Roman Empire. Forget everything you thought you knew about mighty Rome, because we're heading back to a time when that grandeur was starting to fray at the edges, a time of unprecedented chaos and change. Imagine yourself in the late 3rd century CE. It's not the Rome of Caesar or Augustus, not the empire at its peak, building grand aqueducts and conquering vast lands. No, this is a different Rome. A Rome that feels tired. The air is thick with uncertainty, and the ground beneath the feet of its citizens is constantly shifting. This isn't just a historical anecdote, it's a feeling, a pervasive sense of exhaustion that permeated every corner of what was once the most powerful civilization on Earth. Picture this. The empire, once a cohesive, seemingly invincible entity, is now fractured. It's like a priceless vase that's been dropped and, while not completely shattered, has developed deep, radiating cracks. We're talking about a period where emperors popped up and vanished faster than you could say Ave. Emperor. One moment, a man is hailed as ruler. The next, he's overthrown, assassinated, or simply disappears into the annals of forgotten history. This wasn't just a glitch, it was the norm. Can you imagine the instability? The constant fear of what tomorrow would bring. This wasn't just happening in the gilded halls of power in Rome itself. Oh no, the problems were much, much deeper. Look out to the frontiers, the very edges of the empire that were once so fiercely guarded, so meticulously maintained. These aren't solid, impenetrable lines anymore. They're collapsing. Barbarian tribes, feeling the pressure of their own shifting world, are pressing in, not just testing the defenses, but often breaking through them. The legions, once the symbols of Roman might, are stretched thin, often underpaid, and sometimes even demoralized. The idea of Pax Romana, Roman peace, must have felt like a distant, wistful memory to those living on the fringes, constantly facing raids and invasions. And if that wasn't enough, let's talk about the economy, because what truly underpins any great power? Its ability to sustain itself, right? Well, Rome's economy was in ruins. Hyperinflation was rampant. Imagine your money losing its value almost overnight. Gold and silver coins were debased, meaning they contained less and less precious metal, forcing people to carry massive amounts of near-worthless coinage for everyday purchases. Trade routes that were once bustling with goods and wealth became dangerous, or simply ceased to function efficiently. Farmers struggled to produce enough, and those who did faced exorbitant taxes or the constant threat of having their harvests seized. Cities, once vibrant centers of commerce and culture, began to shrink as people moved to the countryside, seeking safety and sustenance. It's a picture of desperation, isn't it? A society grappling with an existential crisis on multiple fronts. The old ways were failing, and nobody quite knew what the new ways would look like. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic fall, but a slow, agonizing decline, punctuated by moments of intense violence and fleeting periods of fragile hope. The confidence that had defined Rome for centuries was eroding, replaced by a weary resignation. This isn't just a story of decline, though. It's also a story of resilience, of adaptation, and of the incredible human spirit trying to navigate unimaginable challenges. It's about how an empire, even when seemingly on its last legs, can still influence the future in profound ways. Understanding this period isn't just about learning dates and names. It's about understanding the complex interplay of political ambition, military might, economic forces, and societal structures that can either build an empire up or tear it apart. We're going to explore how leadership changed, how different emperors tried their best, or sometimes their worst, to stem the tide of collapse. We'll look at the incredible pressure on the common people, who bore the brunt of these grand historical shifts. We'll examine the shifting demographics, the cultural transformations, and the spiritual yearning that began to grip a population seeking answers and meaning in a world that felt increasingly meaningless. This era isn't just about decline. It's about the seeds of new civilizations being sown, about the evolution of ideas that would shape Europe and the world for centuries to come. It's a testament to the fact that, even in the darkest hours, humanity finds a way to adapt, to innovate, and to carry forward the torch of civilization, however dim it may seem at times. So, buckle up, history buffs. We're embarking on an epic journey through one of the most pivotal, yet often misunderstood, chapters of human history. By the end of this series, you'll have a whole new perspective on what it means for an empire to face its twilight. It's a story of struggle, but also of incredible endurance and the undeniable human capacity for change. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical adventure. If you're as fascinated by this period as I am, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. And let me know in the comments what aspects of the Roman Empire-esque decline you find most intriguing. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Before the purple robes, before the divine titles, before the man who would reshape an empire, there was just a boy born not into a Roman palace, but into the rugged, sun-beaten landscape of Dalmatia, a province on the fringes of the Roman world, in what is now modern-day Croatia. Imagine a world far from the marble halls of Rome. This was a land of hard-working farmers, soldiers, and merchants. A place where Roman law and Latin speech mixed with ancient local traditions. It was a tough, practical world, and it forged tough, practical people. Diocles' family was of humble stock, possibly even former slaves. His name itself, Diocles, derived from his mother Dioclea, hints at this modest background. For a boy like him, there were few paths to greatness. He couldn't rely on a famous family name or inherited wealth. His currency would have to be his own grit, his own ambition, and his own mind. And in the late 3rd century Roman Empire, there was one institution above all others that offered a ladder for a man of talent, regardless of his birth: the army. The Roman military of this era was a crucible. The crises of the 3rd century had turned the empire into a constant battlefield. Emperors rose and fell with the turning of the seasons, often assassinated by their own troops. Barbarian tribes pressed on the Rhine and Danube frontiers, while the Persian Sassanid Empire was a constant threat in the east. Life as a soldier was brutal, dangerous, and often short. But for a young, ambitious Dalmatian like Diocles, it was also a world of opportunity. He enlisted, likely as a common foot soldier. Here, the boy from the provinces began his transformation. The army was a meritocracy of the most ruthless kind. You survived and advanced based on your courage, your strength, and your ability to lead. Diocles had all three in abundance. We can picture him in the legionary camps, a stark and imposing figure. He wasn't known for flashy charisma, but for a quiet, unshakable competence. Fellow soldiers would have noticed his discipline first. In an army plagued by insubordination, Diocles was a rock of reliability. He followed orders to the letter, but more importantly, he understood the Y asterisk behind them. He was intelligent, a quick study of strategy and logistics. He wasn't just a brute, he was a thinker. He learned how to manage supplies, how to organize a march, how to fortify a camp, and most critically, how to earn the respect of the men under his command. His reputation began to grow. He wasn't just another legion. He was a natural leader. He rose through the ranks, from a simple soldier to a centurion, then likely to a cavalry commander. Each promotion was earned, not through political maneuvering in a far-off capital, but through proven success on the battlefield. He served under a succession of emperors, men like Probus and Carus, witnessing firsthand the chaos and instability that gripped the empire's leadership. His assignments would have taken him across the vast expanse of the Roman world. He fought along the Danube River, holding the line against Gothic incursions. He marched through the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, clashing with Persian cavalry. With every campaign, his experience deepened. He saw the strengths and, more importantly, the weaknesses of the Roman military machine. He saw how the constant civil wars were draining the empire's lifeblood, leaving its frontiers vulnerable. One of his most significant posts was as the commander of the Protectores Domestici, the elite imperial bodyguard. This wasn't just a ceremonial role. It was a position of immense trust and power. It placed him right at the heart of the imperial court, traveling with the emperor himself. Now, he wasn't just a general on a distant frontier. He was an insider. He observed the intrigues of the court, the paranoia of the emperors, and the deadly dance of power that surrounded the throne. During the Persian campaign under Emperor Carus and his son Numerian, Diocles was a key figure. When Carus died under mysterious circumstances, some say struck by lightning, others say by assassination, and his son Numerian also perished on the march back. The army was thrown into crisis. Who would lead them? The generals gathered, the tension thick in the air. The choice fell not on a man of noble birth, not on a seasoned politician, but on the Dalmatian commander who had earned their unwavering respect through decades of service. In a dramatic scene, Diocles was raised on a shield by the soldiers, the traditional form of acclamation for a new emperor. In front of the assembled army, he drew his sword. He accused the Praetorian prefect, Aper, of murdering Numere, and in a swift, decisive act that would define his character, he executed Aper on the spot. It was a bold, brutal move, but it sent a clear message. The era of chaos was over. A new, firm hand was now on the tiller. And so, in 284 AD, the boy named Diocles, the son of a freedman from a forgotten province, became the most powerful man in the world. Aetok. New more stately name. Gaius Aurelius Valerius Diocletianus. His journey from the dirt floors of Dalmatia to the imperial throne was complete, but his real work, the monumental task of saving a dying empire, was just beginning. This ascent wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a symbol of the changing empire. The old Roman aristocracy was fading, replaced by a new breed of tough, pragmatic military men from the provinces. They were the ones who truly understood the empire's problems because they had lived them, fought for them, and bled for them on the frontiers. Diocletian was the ultimate expression of this new man. He was not an heir. He was a builder. He was not a philosopher. He was a problem solver. His humble origins gave him a perspective that his predecessors lacked, a profound understanding that for the empire to survive, it couldn't just be patched up. It had to be fundamentally rebuilt from the ground up. And Diocletian, the disciplined soldier from Dalmatia, was the only man with the will, the intelligence, and the ruthlessness to do it. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most tumultuous periods of the Roman Empire. Chapter 3, often called the crisis of the 3rd century. Imagine an empire so vast, it stretched across continents, a superpower unparalleled in its day, yet internally, it was teetering on the brink, facing threats from every direction. It's a fascinating, if sometimes terrifying, look at what happens when even the mightiest civilizations grapple with existential challenges. For nearly 50 years, from roughly 235 to 284 AD, Rome was a whirlwind of chaos. This wasn't just a bad decade. It was a systemic breakdown on multiple fronts: political, military, and economic. It truly felt like the end of days for many Romans. And as we peel back the layers, you'll understand why. Let's start with the political landscape, which was nothing short of a revolving door of emperors. This era saw roughly 26 recognized emperors in just 49, and that doesn't even count the numerous usurpers and claimants who rose and fell within months, sometimes even weeks. Think about that for a second. An average reign lasted less than 2 years. Can you imagine the instability? One emperor would be declared, only to be assassinated by his own troops or defeated by a rival almost immediately. This wasn't just bad for morale. It utterly shattered any sense of continuity or long-term planning. Each new emperor often brought his own faction, purged the previous administration, and then tried to secure his position, usually through lavish gifts to the army. This cycle of violence and bribery was incredibly corrosive. Leadership was desperately needed, but stability was a distant dream. Now, let's talk about the military. because this is where a lot of the political instability originated. The Roman army, once the disciplined backbone of the empire, became a political kingmaker. Instead of defending borders, legions were often busy fighting each other, proclaiming their own generals as emperor. Why? Because being emperor often meant substantial bonuses for the soldiers who supported you. This created a dangerous incentive. Kill the current emperor, proclaim a new one, get paid. It was a vicious cycle of military coups. And while they were busy fighting each other, Rome's borders were under relentless assault. To the North Germanic tribes like the Goths and Alemanni launched devastating raids deep into Roman territory, pillaging cities and carrying off vast wealth. These weren't just skirmishes. These were large-scale invasions that threatened the heartland of the empire. To the east, the new Sassanid Persian Empire rose to power, a formidable foe that inflicted humiliating defeats on Rome, even capturing Emperor Valerian in 260 AD. A truly unprecedented event that sent shockwaves across the Roman world. The empire was enormous, yes, but its vastness also meant incredibly long borders to defend. And with legions distracted by internal power struggles, these defenses often crumbled. The need for a strong, unified military command was glaringly obvious, but nowhere to be found. Beyond the immediate battles and political intrigue, a silent, invisible enemy was also devastating the empire. Plagues. The plague of Cyprian, which lasted from roughly 252 to 70 AD, was particularly catastrophic. While exact numbers are debated, it's estimated that at its height, thousands died daily in Rome alone. This wasn't just a health crisis. It was an economic disaster and a military catastrophe. Agricultural production plummeted as farmers died. Trade routes were disrupted, and the Roman army, already stretched thin, saw its ranks decimated. Imagine trying to fight off barbarian invaders when a significant portion of your population and military is succumbing to disease. It was a constant drain on resources and morale, a stark reminder of the fragile nature of life in the ancient world. And then there's the economy. This crisis period saw rampant inflation that would make modern economists gasp. All that political instability and constant warfare cost an enormous amount of money. Emperors needed to pay their soldiers, fund lavish displays, and rebuild after invasions. But with fewer tax revenues coming in due to a plague and economic disruption, what did they do? They debased the currency. Roman silver coins, like the denarius, were increasingly minted with less and less silver, replaced by cheaper base metals. This meant that the same coin could buy less and less, leading to soaring prices for everyday goods. Imagine going to the market and finding that the price of bread has doubled overnight and then tripled the next week. People lost faith in the currency, leading to bartering and a breakdown of the complex Roman economic system. Trade suffered, cities declined, and the economic glue that held the vast empire together began to melt away. The empire was enormous in landmass, but its economic foundations were crumbling beneath the weight of inflation and disruption. So, you have constant invasions from powerful enemies, widespread assassinations of emperors, devastating plagues wiping out populations, and an economy spiraling out of control due to hyperinflation. It's a perfect storm of disaster. The Roman Empire, despite its impressive scale and historic achievements, found itself in a truly desperate situation. It was a stark lesson in how even the greatest powers can be brought to their knees by a combination of internal strife and external pressures. The need for strong, stable, and visionary leadership was never more apparent. These challenges laid bare the vulnerabilities of an empire built on conquest and military might, exposing the deep cracks that had formed beneath its magnificent facade. This period truly highlights the resilience of some Romans, but also the immense suffering endured by many. It's a testament to the fact that even empires that seem invincible can face periods of extreme vulnerability. It forces us to ask, what does it take to pull back from the brink when everything seems to be falling apart? This crisis sets the stage for some truly pivotal figures who would try to restabilize the empire. But we'll save that for a next chapter. For now, ponder the sheer scale of these challenges. It's incredible to think that Rome actually survived this period. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the crisis of the 3rd century. If you found this historical journey as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more history content. And let me know in the comments what you think was the biggest factor in Rome's struggles during this time. Your engagement truly helps this channel grow, and I love hearing your thoughts. See you next time. Today, we are diving headfirst into one of history's most pivotal moments. A story of ambition, power, and the sheer force of will that reshaped the Roman Empire. We're talking about Diocletian and his audacious grab for the purple in 284 CE. Imagine this. The Roman Empire is a mess. It's been decades of chaos, civil war, and economic turmoil. We're in what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. A period so unstable, it felt like the empire was constantly on the brink of collapse. Emperors came and went faster than fashion trends, often meeting violent ends. This wasn't a time for the faint of heart. It was a proving ground for true leaders, or at least those with incredible ambition. Our scene opens in November of 284 CE. The previous Emperor Carus had mysteriously died on campaign in Persia. His sons, Carinus and Numerian, were meant to succeed him. But tragedy, or perhaps something more sinister, strikes again. Numerian, leading the army back from the east, also dies. The official story is illness, but whispers of foul play circulated quickly. His Praetorian prefect, Emperor, is strongly suspected. The army is in a state of high tension. They're deep in foreign territory. Their emperor is dead, and there's a vacuum of power. Who will lead them? Who can restore order and bring them home safely? This is where our protagonist, Diocletian, enters the spotlight. He's not from a grand senatorial family. He's an experienced military commander, born to humble origins in Dalmatia, skilled and respected by his legions. The legions, camped near Nicomedia, in Bithynia, Gava. The air is thick with anticipation and unease. Emperor, the Praetorian prefect and prime suspect in Numerian's death, tries to hold on to power, but the soldiers are looking for a true leader, someone they can trust. They demand answers about Numerian's demise. And then, the moment. The troops, with their deep-seated traditions and their need for a strong hand, proclaim Diocles as their new emperor. They raise him onto a shield, a symbolic gesture dating back centuries, elevating him above the common ranks and into the sacred office of Augustus. This wasn't a slow, calculated move by Diocletian. It was a spontaneous outburst of loyalty and hope from an army desperate for stability. But what he did next shows his true character. Diocletian, now officially Gaius Aurelius Valerius Diocletianus, steps forward. He's calm, composed, even amidst this whirlwind of emotion and uncertainty. This is where his calculated decision-making shines through. He doesn't shy away from the weight of the moment. He doesn't hesitate. He understands the power of symbolism and the need for immediate action to solidify his claim. His first act is breathtakingly bold. A case upper the man widely believed to have murdered Numerian to stand before him. In front of the assembled troops, Diocletian levels the accusation directly. And then, without trial, without hesitation, he draws his sword and personally executes Emperor. Right there, on the spot. It was a shocking display, a clear message to everyone present. A new order had arrived, and justice, swift and brutal, would be served. This wasn't just a vengeful act. It was a masterstroke of political theater. By publicly executing Emperor Diocletian not only avenged Numerian, or at least appeared to, but also instantly removed a rival, eliminated a potential troublemaker, and demonstrated absolute authority. He cemented his legitimacy in the eyes of the soldiers, proving himself decisive and fearless. He wasn't just a general, he was an emperor who would take charge. His calm demeanor during this chaotic transition was crucial. While others might have faltered, Diocletian projected an aura of control. He understood that in times of crisis, people look for strength, not indecision. His actions that day weren't just about seizing power. They were about projecting the image of a leader capable of restoring order to a crumbling empire. But the story doesn't end there, of course. Diocletian still had to contend with Carinus, Numerian's surviving brother, who was a capable ruler in the West. This wasn't just a simple coronation. It was the first step in a long, arduous journey to reunify and reform Rome. His audacious seizure of power at Nicomedia was merely the opening act of an incredible reign that would fundamentally change the Roman world forever. From that moment, Diocletian embarked on one of the most transformative periods in Roman history. He'd go on to implement radical reforms, divide the empire into 4 administrative units with the famous Tetrarchy, stabilize the economy, and launch a massive persecution of Christians. His initial actions in 284 CE laid the groundwork for everything that followed, defining the later Roman Empire. So, what can we learn from Diocletian's bold moment? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes leadership emerges from chaos, and that decisive action, coupled with a strategic mind, can change the course of history. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a visionary, a pragmatist, and a man who understood how to wield power effectively. That wraps up our look at Diocletian's incredible ascent. What do you think about his actions in 284 CE? A necessary evil, or a brilliant display of leadership? Let me know in the comments below. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of Rome. Last time, we saw Diocletian, a soldier from humble beginnings, seized the imperial purple amidst the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. He'd clawed his way to the top, but what he inherited was less of a glorious empire and more of a crumbling giant on the brink of collapse. The borders were porous, the economy was in shambles, and for 50 years, emperors had been rising and falling like dominoes. A single man, no matter how brilliant or ruthless, couldn't possibly be everywhere at once. Imagine trying to put out a dozen fires spread across a continent with just 1 bucket of water. That was Diocletian's reality. A rebellion in Gaul? He'd rush there, only to hear that a Persian host was crossing the Euphrates, a pirate fleet terrorizing the Mediterranean. He'd turn his attention to the sea, and a Germanic tribe would pour across the Danube. The empire was simply too big, its problems too numerous, for one man to manage. Every victory in one province was paid for by a crisis in another. Diocletian, a pragmatic soldier through and through, looked at this impossible equation and understood a fundamental truth that his predecessors had missed or ignored. The system itself was broken. The very model of a single, all-powerful emperor was obsolete. It was a recipe for failure, burnout, and assassination. So, what do you do when the job is too big? You don't just work harder, you change the job. Diocletian wasn't interested in being just another name on the long list of short-lived emperors. He had a vision, a radical, audacious plan to save the Roman world, not by conquering more territory, but by fundamentally redesigning its government. He wasn't just patching holes, he was laying the foundation for a new kind of empire. One built not on the singular authority of one man, but on the revolutionary concept of shared power. In 285 AD, only a year into his reign, Diocletian made a move that stunned the Roman elite. He looked to his trusted friend and fellow officer, a brilliant Pannonian soldier named Maximian, and did the unthinkable. He adopted him as his son and elevated him, granting him the title of Caesar. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a declaration. Diocletian was splitting the burden of the empire. He would take charge of the strategic, wealthy, and complex East, with its Persian frontier and bustling cities. Maximian, a man of action and a superb general, would be given the West, tasked with stamping out rebellions in Gaul and securing the Rhine frontier. This was the first stroke of genius. It was a practical division of labor. Now, there were 2 emperors, 2 supreme commanders, able to react to threats on opposite ends of the continent simultaneously. But Diocletian was a man who thought in decades, not just years. He knew that simply cutting the empire in half wasn't enough. What happened when he or Maximian died? The old cycle of civil war would just begin anew. This initial division was just the first step in a much grander, more intricate design. He wasn't just looking for a co-emperor. He was building a system, a Yarlator, in 286 AD. Diocletian elevated Maximian, again, this time to the full rank of Augustus, making him his equal in title. Now there were 2 Augusti, 2 senior emperors, each with their own court, their own army, and their own sphere of influence. But make no mistake, Diocletian remained the senior partner. He was the architect, the grand strategist. His authority was based not just on his title, but on his intellect and the sheer force of his will. He referred to Maximian as his brother, fostering a sense of divine fraternity. They issued coins bearing both their faces, projecting an image of unity and concordia. Augustorun, the harmony of the emperors. This was a message to the world. The empire was a single entity, governed by a united college of rulers. An attack on Maximian in the west was an attack on the whole imperial project, and Diocletian's might in the east would be brought to bear. This partnership immediately paid dividends. While Maximian crushed the Bagaudae rebels in Gaul and secured the Rhine, Diocletian was free to campaign along the Danube, reorganize the eastern provinces, and negotiate with the Persian Empire from a position of strength. For the first time in a generation, the imperial government felt proactive, not reactive. Order was slowly being restored, but Diocletian's vision went even deeper. He understood that the greatest source of instability was succession. The path to the throne was too often paved with blood. So, how do you create a peaceful, predictable transfer of power? Diocletian's answer was the next phase of his master plan. In 293 AD, 7 years after making Maximian his co-Augustus, he expanded the imperial college once more. Each Augustus would adopt a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would be his designated heir. Diocletian chose a formidable officer named Galerius as his Caesar in the east. Maximian, in the west, chose Constantius Chlorus, another proven general and administrator. And so, the Tetrarchy rule of 4 was born. It was an imperial machine of unprecedented complexity. 2 senior Augusti, Diocletian, and Maximian, and 2 junior Caesars, Galerius and Each man was assigned a specific geographic quarter of the empire, complete with his own capital city, located not in Rome, but near the strategic frontiers where they were most needed. Nicomedia for Diocletian, Milan for Maximian, Sirmium for Galerius, and Trier for Constantius. This structure was brilliant. It provided 4 leaders to handle the empire's many crises. It created a clear line of succession. When the Augusti retired or died, their Caesars would be promoted to Augustus, and they, in turn, would appoint new Caesars. It was meant to be a self-perpetuating system, a meritocracy where proven commanders were groomed for supreme power, eliminating the need for bloody civil wars. The Caesars were also bound to the Augusti by marriage, creating a web of familial ties that further reinforced the structure. Galerius married Diocletian's daughter, and Constantius married Maximian's stepdaughter. It was a fusion of military, political, and personal loyalty. Rome itself was deliberately sidelined. The city was still the symbolic heart of the empire, but it was no longer its political or military center. Power now resided with the emperors, wherever they might be campaigning on the frontier. This was a seismic shift, reflecting the new reality that the empire's survival depended on its armies and its borders, not on the Senate and the old aristocracy. Diocletian surrounded this new system with a powerful new ideology. He and Maximian weren't just emperors, they were divine. Diocletian took the title Jovius, identifying with Jupiter, the king of the gods, the thinker, the planner. Maximian became Herculeus, linked to Hercules, the son of Jupiter, the tireless hero, the man of action. This wasn't just ego, it was political theater of the highest order. It elevated the emperors far above ordinary mortals, making rebellion not just treason, but sacrilege. Their authority, they claimed, came directly from the gods, creating a sacred distance between ruler and ruled. This was Diocletian's grand vision taking its final form. An empire divided for administrative efficiency, but united in purpose. A government of 4 men, bound by duty, marriage, and a shared divine mandate. A system designed to provide security on the frontiers and, most importantly, a peaceful, orderly succession. It was a radical departure from centuries of Roman tradition, a bold attempt to engineer stability and build an empire that could last. For a time, it seemed to work. The fires were being put out. The giant was stirring, no longer crumbling, but standing tall on 4 powerful pillars. But a system built by one man, no matter how brilliant, is only as strong as the men who follow him. And as we'll see, human ambition is not so easily engineered. Thank you so much for watching. Diocletian's Tetrarchy was one of the most significant political experiments in history. What do you think of his plan? Was it genius or doomed from the start? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We truly appreciate your support. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into an absolutely fascinating period of history. Specifically, a monumental effort to completely rebuild an empire's government from the ground up. We're talking about Chapter 6, reorganizing the government. And trust me, this isn't just dry history. It's a masterclass in vision, strategy, and overcoming immense challenges. Imagine stepping into chaos, an administration riddled with inefficiency, corruption, and a severe lack of central control. That was the daunting task facing our visionary leader. His solution? A radical, yet meticulously planned, overhaul. He didn't just patch things up. He tore down the old, crumbling structures and erected an entirely new framework designed for resilience, fairness, and long-term stability. This wasn't about quick fixes. It was about laying foundations that would last for generations. The stakes were incredibly high. The future of an entire civilization hung in the balance. So, how do you even begin to untangle such a mess and reconstruct something so vast and vital? Our leader understood that a strong, functional government is the backbone of any thriving society. He recognized that the existing system was fragmented, with power concentrated in too few hands and accountability almost non-existent. People were suffering, resources were mismanaged, and the empire was vulnerable. He needed a clear, actionable plan, and he needed the political will to see it through, even against significant opposition. This wasn't just a political move, it was a societal imperative. One of the cornerstones of this grand reorganization was the establishment of clear, defined bureaucratic layers. Think of it like building a massive, intricate machine where every single gear, lever, and switch has a precise function and placement. Before, it was a tangled mess, but now, positions and responsibilities were meticulously outlined, from the highest-ranking ministers down to the local administrators. This clarity was revolutionary. It meant less confusion, fewer overlaps in authority, and a much more streamlined process for decision-making and execution. No more guessing games about who was in charge or what their job entailed. This wasn't just about drawing lines on an organizational chart. It was about injecting professionalism and accountability into every level of government. Each role came with specific duties, expected outcomes, and reporting structures. It allowed for specialization, meaning people could become experts in their particular area, whether it was finance, infrastructure, or defense. This specialization naturally led to greater efficiency and effectiveness. Imagine the boost in productivity when everyone knows their role and can focus their energy where it matters most. It was a massive step towards a more functional and responsive state. But even with clear bureaucratic layers, an empire as vast as this one couldn't be effectively governed from a single capital. That's where the brilliance of the regional governors came into play. Our leader understood the immense diversity across his lands, different cultures, economies, and local needs. A one-size-fits-all approach simply wouldn't work. So, he strategically appointed capable governors to oversee specific regions, empowering them with significant authority to manage local affairs, collect taxes, and maintain order. These governors weren't just figures, they were the emperor's direct representatives on the ground. This decentralization of authority was a stroke of genius. It brought governance closer to the people, allowing for more responsive and tailored solutions to local challenges. Problems could be addressed swiftly without having to wait for directives from the distant capital. It also fostered a sense of local ownership and participation. However, this delegation of power came with an important caveat. These governors were still accountable to the central government. They operated within a clear framework of laws and policies, ensuring consistency across the empire while still allowing for local adaptation. It was a delicate balance, but a crucial one for stability. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room that plagues so many governments, both ancient and modern. Corruption. Our leader was keenly aware that even the most perfectly designed system could be undermined by greed and illicit activities. So, he didn't just hope for the best. He put in place a robust system specifically designed to prevent corruption and maintain the integrity of the administration. This wasn't a passive measure. It was an active and continuous effort to safeguard the system. It's a lesson that remains incredibly relevant today. How did he do it? Well, there were several key strategies. Firstly, he established rigorous selection criteria for all government officials, emphasizing not just competence, but also integrity and a commitment to public service. Appointments weren't just based on family connections or wealth, but on merit. Secondly, he implemented regular audits and inspections, creating a system of checks and balances where officials were held accountable for their actions and decisions. There were clear consequences for malfeasance, sending a strong message that corruption would not be tolerated. Beyond audits, a system of public reporting and oversight was encouraged. Citizens were given avenues to report grievances or suspicions of wrongdoing, empowering them to participate in maintaining governmental integrity. This transparency was a powerful deterrent. Moreover, officials were paid fair salaries, reducing the temptation to seek illicit gains. It was a multi-pronged approach that recognized human nature, while also providing strong safeguards and incentives for ethical conduct. This proactive stance against corruption was fundamental to earning and maintaining public trust. Another critical aspect of this reorganization was the deliberate effort to decentralize authority, not just geographically, but institutionally. While regional governors had significant power, their authority was checked by other centralized bodies, and by each other. No single individual or faction could accumulate too much power without oversight. This was a direct response to past eras where unchecked power had led to tyranny and instability. The leader understood that true stability came from distributed power and a system of mutual accountability. This involved creating independent bodies or councils that had specific oversight roles, ensuring that decisions were reviewed and challenged where necessary. The idea was to prevent the emergence of powerful regional warlords or overly influential factions within the capital itself. By spreading authority and embedding checks, he built a system that was inherently more resistant to power grabs and internal conflicts. It was about creating a resilient government that could withstand internal pressures and external threats. This structural wisdom was truly ahead of its time. The long-term impact of these reforms was nothing short of transformative. The empire moved from a state of disarray and vulnerability to one of unprecedented stability and prosperity, with clear bureaucratic layers, efficient regional governance, and a proactive stance against corruption. The administration became far more effective at serving its people. Resources were managed better, justice was administered more fairly, and the government was able to undertake ambitious projects that benefited everyone, from grand infrastructure to educational initiatives. This reorganization wasn't just about tweaking a few policies. It was about fundamentally reshaping the relationship between the government and its citizens. It fostered trust, predictability, and a sense of shared purpose. People knew what to expect from their government, and officials knew what was expected of them. This stability allowed the empire to flourish, to innovate, and to project its influence peacefully across its borders. It's a testament to the idea that thoughtful, systematic reform can lead to profound and lasting positive change. So, what can we learn from this incredible historical example? It's a powerful reminder that strong, transparent, and accountable governance is not just desirable, but absolutely essential for any society to thrive. It shows us the value of clear roles, distributed authority, and a relentless commitment to preventing corruption. These principles, while applied centuries ago, remain incredibly relevant for building resilient and equitable societies today. It's about building systems that serve the many, not just the few. This visionary leader understood that the strength of an empire was unjust in its armies or its wealth, but in the integrity and efficiency of its administration. He taught us that by tackling complex problems with clear vision, meticulous planning, and unwavering determination, even the most daunting challenges can be overcome. It's a powerful lesson in leadership and the enduring impact of good governance. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Chapter 6 and the reorganization of this incredible government. I hope you found this as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more historical deep dives, and let me know in the comments what other historical periods or topics you'd like us to explore next. Your support truly means the world. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning. Welcome back to our journey through Roman history. Today, we're remarching into one of the most transformative periods for the Roman military. The reign of Diocletian. Imagine an empire stretching for thousands of miles, constantly under pressure from all sides. For decades, Rome had been playing a dangerous game of whack-a-mole, rushing legions from one crisis to another. This was the crisis of the 3rd century, and the old system just wasn't working. The borders were porous, the army was overstretched, and emperors were rising and falling faster than you could say Ave Caesar. It was a recipe for disaster. Then came Diocletian, a soldier emperor who knew the military inside and out. He looked at this chaotic map and realized that a radical new approach was needed. You couldn't just have one massive army trying to be everywhere at once. It was slow, inefficient, and left vast stretches of the frontier dangerously exposed. Diocletian's solution was revolutionary, and it would redefine Roman military strategy for centuries to come. He decided to split the army into 2 distinct, specialized forces. This wasn't just a minor tweak. It was a complete overhaul of Roman defensive doctrine. He was about to create a system of defense in depth, moving away from a brittle front line to a more flexible, resilient, and strategic model of control. This is the story of how Diocletian reforged the Roman war machine. So, what was this grand plan? Diocletian created 2 types of soldiers: the limitanae and the comitatenses. Let's start with the limitanae. The name comes from limes, the Latin word for a fortified border. These were the frontier troops, the border guards of the Roman Empire, but they weren't your typical elite legionaries from the movies. The limitanae were more like a professional militia. They were settled along the frontiers, often given plots of land to farm. They lived in fortified towns and outposts, raising their families right there on the edge of the empire. Their primary job wasn't to fight massive pitched battles, but to be the first line of defense. Think of them as the empire's early warning system. They patrolled the borders, maintained the forts, and gathered intelligence. If a small raiding party tried to cross the Rhine or the Danube, the limitanae were there to intercept them. They were the tripwire. Their presence made opportunistic raids much more difficult and costly for any would-be invaders. By settling them on the land, Diocletian created a permanent, vested interest in defending the local area. These weren't just soldiers serving a tour of duty far from home. They were defending their own homes, their farms, and their families. This made them a dedicated and cost-effective force, deeply rooted in the regions they were tasked to protect. Now, while the limitanae held the line, what happened if a truly massive invasion force broke through? That's where the second part of Diocletian's genius plan comes in. These were the mobile field armies, the elite, heavy-hitting forces of the empire. The word comitatenses comes from comitatus, meaning escort, as they originally formed the escort of the emperor. Unlike the stationary limitanae, these were full-time, professional soldiers, kept in strategic reserves deep within the empire's interior. They were better paid, better equipped, and constantly training for large-scale warfare. They were the empire's strategic reserve, the cavalry ready to charge to the rescue. The system worked like a 1-2 punch. First, an invading force would have to deal with the limitanae. This would slow them down, wear them out, and most importantly, give the Romans time. Time for word to reach the regional commanders, and time for the comitatenses to mobilize. Once the location and strength of the main invading army were clear, the emperor or his top generals would lead the powerful field army to confront and destroy the threat. This prevented the empire's best troops from being tied down in garrison duty on a quiet Tuesday. Instead, they could be deployed precisely where they were needed most, acting as a powerful, centralized hammer to smash major threats. This separation of roles was the key. It allowed for both a broad, static defense and a powerful, mobile strike force. This new system fundamentally changed Roman strategy. Before, the strategy was largely one of forward defense. The goal was to meet and defeat any enemy at the border, or even beyond it. This relied on a string of large, powerful legions stationed directly on the frontier. But as we saw during the 3rd century crisis, this system was brittle. If an enemy broke through at one point, there was often little to stop them from rampaging through the provinces until a distant army could march to intercept. Diocletian's reforms created what military historians called defense in depth. The frontier was no longer a single wall, but a deep, layered defensive zone. An invader wouldn't just face one line of defense, but a series of obstacles. First, they'd encounter the Limitani and their network of forts. Even if they bypassed some, they couldn't ignore them all, and their supply lines would be constantly harassed. This initial friction would bleed their strength and slow their advance. All the while, the comitatenses would be on the move, not rushing blindly to the border, but maneuvering to a strategic position to force a decisive battle on ground of their own choosing. This shifted the strategic initiative back to the Romans. They were no longer just reacting to enemy moves. They were absorbing the initial blow and setting a trap. It was a move from reactive defense to strategic control, allowing the empire to manage its vast borders much more effectively with the resources it had. So, did it work? For a considerable time? Yes, and remarkably well. The system of Limitani and comitatenses, further refined by later emperors like Constantine, provided the empire with a new lease on life. It helped stabilize the frontiers and bring an end to the constant cycle of invasion and civil war that defined the 3rd century. The Limitani proved effective at handling the low-level, persistent threats of raids and incursions, which were the most common type of border friction. This freed up the elite comitatenses to deal with the rare but far more dangerous large-scale invasions. This strategic flexibility was a huge advantage. However, the system wasn't perfect and had long-term consequences. Over time, a gap in prestige, pay, and quality emerged between the two forces. The comitatenses were seen as the real army, while the Limitani were sometimes looked down upon as mere farmer soldiers. This could create friction and impact morale. Furthermore, as the empire faced increasing economic strain, it became harder to maintain the large, expensive mobile armies. There was always a temptation to pull troops from the frontiers to bolster the field armies, weakening the first line of defense. And in the later Western Empire, when central authority collapsed, the mobile field armies were often destroyed in civil wars, leaving the frontiers defended only by the Limitani, who were never intended to stop massive organized invasions on their own. In conclusion, Diocletian's military reforms were a brilliant and necessary response to the crisis of his time. By creating the Limitani and comitatenses, he transformed the Roman army from a brittle frontline force into a flexible, resilient system of defense in depth. He moved the empire away from simply reacting to threats and towards a more proactive strategy of managing its vast borders. This reorganization was a cornerstone of the Dominate period, and a key reason why the Roman Empire was able to survive and even thrive for another century and a half. The West, and for 1,000 years in the East. It stands as a testament to Diocletian's practical, clear-eyed, and revolutionary approach to saving the Roman world. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Roman military strategy. It's a fascinating subject that shows just how adaptable this ancient empire could be. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Imagine an empire so vast, so chaotic, that one man couldn't possibly govern it all. That's exactly the situation Rome found itself in by the end of the 3rd century CE. But then, a visionary leader stepped forward with a radical solution that would change the face of Roman governance forever. Get ready, because we're about to explore how Diocletian's brilliant, albeit temporary, fix brought stability back to the ailing empire. So, let's set the scene. We're in 293 CE, a year that marks a seismic shift in Roman politics. For decades, the Roman Empire had been reeling from what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. We're talking about constant civil wars, usurpers popping up left and right, economic collapse, and relentless invasions from barbarian tribes on all fronts. It was a mess, to put it mildly. The empire was simply too big, too unwieldy for a single emperor to effectively manage. Communications were slow, borders were vast, and threats were everywhere. Something had to give, and that something was the traditional solo emperorship. This man was a military genius and an administrative powerhouse. He had already become emperor in 284 CE, and immediately set about trying to stabilize things. But he soon realized that the sheer scale of the problem demanded more than just one strong leader. He needed partners, and not just any partners. He needed a carefully constructed system that would ensure stability, succession, and effective governance across the entire empire. This realization led him to implement one of the most ingenious political experiments in history, the Tetrarchy. The word Tetrarchy itself means rule by four, and that's exactly what it was. Diocletian didn't just appoint one co-emperor, he appointed three. He created a tiered system of leadership designed to cover all bases and secure all borders. At the top, you had two senior emperors, known as Augustus. Diocletian, being the brilliant architect of this system, naturally took one of these positions. He chose the East, recognizing its strategic importance and economic strength. And for his fellow Augustus, he didn't pick just anyone. He selected his trusted friend and military comrade, Maximian. Maximian, a man of immense military prowess, was tasked with governing the western half of the empire. Now, this alone was a significant step to Augustus sharing power. But Diocletian's genius didn't stop there. To ensure continuity and to provide immediate support and succession, he added another layer. Two junior emperors, known as Caesars. Each Augustus would have his own Caesar, who would effectively serve as a second-in-command, an heir apparent, and a regional governor, all rolled into one. This was crucial for both immediate administration and for a planned, peaceful transfer of power in the future. For the eastern half, under Diocletian, he appointed Galerius as his Caesar. Galerius was a seasoned military commander, known for his toughness and loyalty. He would be responsible for areas like the Balkans and the Danubian frontier, facing off against barbarian threats in that region. And for the western half, under Maximian, the choice fell upon Constantius Chlorus. Constantius, who would later become the father of Constantine the Great, was a capable general and an administrator, tasked with securing the volatile frontiers of Gaul and Britain. So, let's recap the lineup. In the east, we had Augustus Diocletian with Caesar Galerius. In the west, we had Augustus Maximian with Caesar Constantius Chlorus. This quartet of rulers was the Tetrarchy. But it wasn't just about having four guys in charge. The system was meticulously designed with a clear logic behind it. Let's break down that logic. 4 rulers, 4 regions, 1 empire. First, the idea of 4 rulers. This allowed for immediate, localized responses to the myriad threats plaguing the empire. If a barbarian invasion occurred in Gaul, Constantius was right there. If trouble brewed on the Persian frontier, Diocletian or Galerius could address it directly. No more waiting for a single emperor in Rome to get a message, gather troops, and travel for months. The empire was effectively divided into administrative zones, each with its own dedicated leadership. This drastically improved efficiency and responsiveness, something the old system desperately lacked. Second, the 4 regions. While the empire remained politically unified, it was administratively segmented. Diocletian chose Nicomedia as his capital in the east, while Galerius resided in the west. Maximian established his court in Mediolanum, modern-day Milan, and Constantius based himself in Augusta Treverum, modern-day Trier. Notice something important here. Rome was no longer the sole imperial capital. This was a symbolic, yet highly practical, move. The traditional capital was too far from the troubled borders. By moving the centers of power closer to the frontiers, the emperors could be where they were needed most. This didn't diminish Rome's historical significance, but it did acknowledge the logistical realities of governing such a vast territory. And finally, the crucial point: 1 empire. Despite having 4 rulers and 4 administrative regions, the Tetrarchy was fundamentally designed to maintain the unity of the Roman Empire. This wasn't a division into separate states. It was a division of labor within a single, cohesive entity. Diocletian was the senior Augustus, the architect and ultimate authority of the entire system. His word carried the most weight, and the other three were ultimately subservient to his grand vision. This central authority, even with distributed power, was essential to prevent the empire from fracturing entirely. The beauty of the Tetrarchy, in Diocletian's eyes, was its built-in succession plan. The idea was that after a set period, usually around 20 years, the two Augusti would voluntarily retire. Their Caesars would then be promoted to Augusti, and they, in turn, would appoint new Caesars. This was intended to prevent the civil wars that had plagued the empire for so long. By establishing a clear, peaceful line of succession, Diocletian hoped to remove the incentive for ambitious generals to seize power by force. It was a brilliant theoretical solution to a chronic problem. This system brought an unprecedented period of stability and peace to the Roman Empire, a much-needed respite after decades of turmoil. It allowed Diocletian to implement further sweeping reforms in the economy, military, and legal system, all under the protective umbrella of the Tetrarchy. He truly believed he had found the ultimate solution to Rome's woes. Of course, as history buffs know, the Tetrarchy didn't last forever. Its ultimate failure would lead to another dramatic period of Roman history, paving the way for one of Rome's most famous emperors. But that's a story for another time. For now, let us appreciate the sheer audacity and innovative spirit of Diocletian in creating this unique system of shared power. It was a testament to his understanding of the empire's immense challenges and his determination to save it. What do you think about the Tetrarchy? Do you think it was a stroke of genius, or was it always doomed to fail? Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of ancient propaganda and how one emperor, Diocletian, masterfully used symbolism to save a crumbling empire. Imagine a time of chaos, the crisis of the 3rd century, where emperors were being assassinated left and right. How do you bring stability? How do you convince everyone you're not just another warlord waiting to be overthrown? Diocletian's answer was brilliant. You become more than a man. You'll become a god on earth. He established a system called the Tetrarchy, a rule of 4 to manage the vast empire. But this wasn't just a political arrangement. It was a divine one. Diocletian, the senior emperor or Augustus in the East, didn't just claim to be favored by the gods. He styled himself as the earthly representative of Jupiter, the king of the gods. His co-emperor in the West, Maximian, was linked to Hercules, the tireless hero and son of Jupiter. See the genius here? It wasn't just two men ruling. It was a divine hierarchy. Diocletian, like Jupiter, was the strategic mind, the ultimate authority. Maximian, like Hercules, was the muscle, the relentless enforcer, carrying out Jupiter's will. This wasn't just some abstract idea. It was a powerful marketing campaign plastered across the Roman world. Let's start with the money. Coins were the internet of the ancient world, reaching every corner of the empire. On them, you'd see Diocletian with the inscription Ioube Seo Ene Arube Ate O Ere Imini Trupitar de Pisarva. His portraits often showed the muth, his stern, otherworldly gaze, looking more like a divine icon than a specific person. Maximian's coins would read Herculi Victori, to Hercules a Victor, often depicting him in a more active, heroic pose. Every time someone made a transaction, they were being reminded of this divine order. This wasn't just currency. It was a daily dose of imperial propaganda, reinforcing the idea that the emperor's power was granted by the heavens and was therefore unshakable. This divine branding extended to monumental architecture and art. Think about the portraits of the famous porphyry sculpture, now in Venice, shows the 4 rulers embracing. But look closely, they are nearly identical. Their individual features are suppressed in favor of a uniform look of grim determination and unity. They aren't meant to be seen as individuals like Augustus or Trajan. They are an office, an interchangeable part of a divine system. This sameness communicated a powerful message. The empire's stability no longer rested on one man's life, but on the eternal institution of the Tetrarchy itself. If one emperor fell, the system, divinely ordained, would endure. The two junior emperors, the Caesars, were also brought into this family. Galerius Diocletians. Caesar was linked to Mars, the god of war. Constantius Maximianus Caesar was associated with Sol, the unconquered sun. It created a complete divine pantheon ruling the Roman world. Jupiter and Hercules were the senior partners, with Mars and Sol as their capable devotees. This wasn't just about legitimacy. It was about creating an aura of sacredness around the emperors. To rebel against them was not just treason. It was sacrilege. It was an act against the divine order of the cosmos. This system is beautifully illustrated in places like Diocletian's palace in Split, Croatia. It was designed less like a home and more like a fortified temple complex. The southern entrance, the Porta Aenea, opened directly from the sea, allowing the emperor to enter in a grand, almost theatrical procession. His mausoleum was designed as an octagon, and his main audience hall had a domed ceiling. Architectural features that symbolized the heavens and the cosmos. When Diocletian appeared before his subjects, he did so in a carefully choreographed ceremony, often appearing from behind a curtain, elevated and adorned in purple robes and jewels. People had to perform proskynesis, prostrating themselves before him as one would before a god. He wasn't just an emperor, he was a living idol. So, why was this so effective? Because it addressed the core problem of the 3rd century, the constant civil wars, by making the imperial office sacred and detaching it from the individual. Diocletian made the emperor less of a political target and more of a religious figurehead. You couldn't just assassinate a man anymore. You had to defy a god. This divine ideology projected an image of eternal stability and power. The Jupiter-Hercules partnership was a perfect narrative. The supreme mind and the indefatigable arm working in perfect harmony to protect and restore the Roman world. It was a story of order triumphing over chaos, and it was a story the people of the empire desperately needed to believe. Ultimately, the political system of the Tetrarchy didn't last long after Diocletian's abdication. Internal rivalries tore it apart, but the precedent he set was profound. He fundamentally changed the nature of Roman Empire, shifting it from the first citizen model of the early empire to a more autocratic, divinely sanctioned monarchy. This concept of the sacred ruler would echo through the centuries, influencing the Byzantine emperors and, eventually, the monarchies of medieval Europe. Diocletian's propaganda campaign was so successful that even after his system collapsed, the idea of an emperor chosen by God remained a cornerstone of imperial power for another 1,000 years. It shows that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, but a story. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into Roman propaganda interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. After 50 years of chaos, civil war, and barbarian invasions, the Roman Empire was on its knees. It was a period so dark, so violent, that historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century. The empire had fractured, its economy was in ruins, and its people lived in constant fear. It seemed like the end, but from the ashes of this near collapse, a new system emerged, a radical idea that would breathe new life into the dying empire. This is the story of the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4, and how it saved Rome from itself. So, what exactly was the crisis of the 3rd century? Imagine an empire stretching from Britain to Syria, suddenly imploding. For half a century, emperors were made and murdered with horrifying regularity. We're talking more than 20 so-called barracks emperors in just 50 years, most of whom met a violent end. The frontiers crumbled. Goths poured across the Danube. Alemanni and Franks smashed through the Rhine defenses. And in the east, the mighty Sassanid Empire of Persia captured a Roman emperor in battle, a humiliation of epic proportions. To make matters worse, the empire literally split apart. The Gallic Empire broke away in the west, and the Palmyrian Empire rose in the east. The Roman world was a fractured, bleeding mess. The economy was a disaster. With constant civil war, trade routes were severed. A farmer in Egypt couldn't safely ship his grain to Rome. A merchant in Gaul couldn't get his goods to the legions on the Rhine. To pay the soldiers they desperately needed, emperors massively devalued the currency, minting coins with less and less silver until they were little more than bronze tokens with a silver wash. This triggered hyperinflation. Savings were wiped out, and people reverted to a barter economy. The sophisticated economic system that had been the backbone of Roman power was shattered. The great Roman roads, marvels of engineering, fell into disrepair, becoming dangerous tracks haunted by bandits and deserters. For the average person, life was brutal and short. Into this chaos steps a man named, born to a humble family in Dalmatia, the modern-day Balkans. He rose through the ranks of the army, not through noble birth, but through sheer talent and ruthless ambition. In 284 AD, after the current emperor was mysteriously assassinated, the army acclaimed him as their new leader. He took the name Diocletian. But Diocletian was different. He had witnessed the chaos firsthand. He knew that the old system was broken. The job of ruling the Roman Empire had become too big, too complex, too dangerous for one man alone. One emperor couldn't be in Britain fighting Picts, and in Syria fighting Persians at the same time. The empire needed a radical overhaul, and so, in 286 AD, Diocletian made a revolutionary move. He chose a trusted fellow officer Maximian, and elevated him to the rank of co-emperor or Augustus. Diocletian would rule the wealthier, more strategic, eastern half of the empire from his new capital in Italy, while Maximian would take charge of the turbulent west, based in Milan. This wasn't about dividing the empire. It was about dividing the asterisk workload asterisk. The empire was still one, but now it had two senior emperors to manage its immense challenges. Maximian, a brilliant general, immediately set to work, pushing back Germanic tribes and crushing rebellions in Gaul. For the first time in a generation, the western frontier began to stabilize. But Diocletian wasn't finished. He realized that even with two emperors, the problem of succession remained. How do you prevent a civil war every time an emperor dies? His solution was even more audacious. In 293 AD, he created the Tetrarchy, or the Rule of Four. He and Maximian, the two senior Augusti, would each adopt a junior emperor, a Caesar. These Caesars would be their designated heirs and their chief lieutenants. Diocletian chose Galerius as his Caesar in the east, and Maximian chose Constantius Cloris in the west. This system was brilliant. Each of the four rulers was given a specific territory to govern and defend. Galerius took the Balkans, a critical hotspot, while Constantius took Gaul and Britain. Now, there was a Roman emperor near every major frontier, ready to respond instantly to any threat. No longer would a usurper in Britain have months to gather strength before the emperor in Rome could react. The Caesars were also the heirs apparent. The plan was that after a set period, the two Augusti would retire. The two Caesars would be promoted to Augusti, and they would then appoint new Caesars. It was a system designed to ensure a peaceful, predictable transfer of power, ending the cycle of assassination and civil war for good. With the new leadership structure in place, the Tetrarchs unleashed a wave of reforms to fix the broken empire. Their first priority was security. With 4 supreme commanders in the field, they launched coordinated campaigns on all fronts. Maximian and Constantius secured the Rhine frontier and reconquered Britain from a breakaway usurper. In the east, Diocletian pacified the Egyptian frontier, while Galerius won a stunning, decisive victory over the Sassanid Persians, securing the eastern border for a generation and even expanding Roman territory. The message was clear: Rome was back, and its armies were once again masters of the world. To pay for this renewed military might, Diocletian completely overhauled the tax system. The old, chaotic methods were replaced with a new, standardized system of assessment based on land and labor, called the asterisk, capito iugatio. Asterisk. It was a census of the empire's wealth and manpower. While it was a heavy burden on the populace, it was at least predictable. It provided the state with a steady, reliable stream of revenue to pay for the army and the bureaucracy, to fight inflation, a stable currency, and, in 301 AD, the Edict on Maximum Prices. This was a bold attempt to set legal price limits for thousands of goods and services, as well as wages for laborers. While the edict was ultimately unenforceable, and a failure. It shows the sheer scale of the Tetrarch's ambition to micromanage and restore order to every aspect of Roman life. The Tetrarchy also projected a new image of imperial power. Diocletian cultivated an aura of divine authority, borrowing heavily from Eastern court ceremony. He was no longer the first citizen like Augustus. He was Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Emperors wore jeweled robes and diadems, and subjects had to prostrate themselves in their presence. This wasn't just about ego. It was a political strategy, by making the emperor a remote, godlike figure. Diocletian hoped to elevate him above the bloody fray of army politics and discourage assassinations. The four tetrarchs were presented as a united brotherhood, a divine college of rulers working in harmony for the good of the state. Their statues always depict them as nearly identical, embracing a powerful piece of propaganda showing their unity and shared purpose. For a time, it worked. For about 20 years, the Tetrarchy delivered what it had promised: peace and stability. For the first time in decades, roads were being repaired, not just for armies, but for trade. Commerce, though still fragile, began to flow again between the provinces. Cities started to rebuild their walls, not in a panic, but as part of a coordinated imperial defense strategy. A sense of normalcy, a feeling that the empire had a future, returned to the Roman world. The Tetrarchy had pulled the empire back from the brink. It had stabilized the frontiers, reformed the administration, and solved, temporarily, the succession crisis. It was a remarkable achievement, a period of rebirth after a century of decay. Of course, the system wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't last. The rigid controls and heavy taxes placed enormous strain on the population, and the central succession plan, the peaceful retirement of the Augustus, had a fatal flaw. It didn't account for human ambition, especially the ambition of the Caesar's sons, like Constantine and Maxentius, who were left out of the line of succession. In 305 AD, Diocletian did something no Roman emperor had ever done before. He voluntarily retired. Maximian was reluctantly forced to do the same. But the new Tetrarchy that followed soon crumbled into a new round of civil wars. Yet, we can't overstate the importance of what Diocletian and the Tetrarchy achieved. They stopped the bleeding. They created the framework that allowed the Roman Empire to survive, in one form or another, for centuries more. The division of the empire into an eastern and western administrative half would become permanent, laying the groundwork for the future Byzantine Empire. The powerful, centralized bureaucracy and the authoritarian style of rule would define the late Roman state. The Tetrarchy wasn't a final solution, but it was the critical first step. It was the moment when Rome, against all odds, chose to be reborn. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey back to the world of the Tetrarchs interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories from history, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our series on Last time, we explored his military and political reforms. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and ambitious economic experiments in ancient history: Diocletian's attempt to slam the brakes on runaway inflation. Imagine this. The Roman Empire is teetering on the brink of economic collapse. Decades of civil war, debased currency, and unstable leadership have sent prices soaring. A soldier's pay, once enough to support a family, can barely buy a loaf of bread. The marketplace is a scene of chaos and despair. This was the reality Diocletian faced. The silver content in the denarius, the everyday coin, had plummeted to almost zero. It was essentially worthless. People were resorting to barter, trading goods for goods, because they had lost all faith in money. The entire economic system was grinding to a halt. Diocletian, ever the man of action, knew he had to do something drastic. His solution: the Edict on Maximum Prices, issued in the year 301 CE. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was an imperial decree, carved into stone and displayed in marketplaces from Britain to Syria. It was arguably the most comprehensive price and wage control policy the world had ever seen. So, what did the edict actually do? It set a fixed maximum price for over 1,000 goods and services. We're talking everything from wheat, barley, and wine to beef, fish, and olive oil. It didn't stop there. The edict also fixed the price of clothing, a linen tunic, a pair of boots, and even the cost of labor. It specified the maximum daily wage for a farmhand, a stonemason, a teacher, a lawyer, and even a mule driver. The level of detail is astonishing. It even set the price for a pint of beer from Egypt versus a pint from Gaul. The goal was simple and, on the surface, noble: to stop price gouging, stabilize the economy, and ensure that everyone, especially the soldiers and the poor, could afford the necessities of life. The preamble to the edict is incredibly revealing. Diocletian doesn't just lay down the law. He explains his reasoning with a powerful moral argument. He rails against the uncontrolled madness and limitless and furious avarice of merchants who are exploiting the crisis for their own gain. He speaks of a shared duty to the public good and a desire to restore fairness and stability. You can feel his frustration and his genuine concern for the welfare of the Roman people. He saw this not just as an economic problem, but as a moral failing that threatened the very fabric of the empire. For him, a stable economy was the foundation of a just society. The penalty for violating the edict was severe: death. And it wasn't just for the seller who charged too much. Any buyer who agreed to pay more than the maximum price, and any merchant who withheld goods from the market to create artificial scarcity, also faced the ultimate penalty. Diocletian was not messing around. He believed that the survival of the empire depended on enforcing this economic order. So, did it work? In a word, no. It was a spectacular failure, and the reasons for its failure are a classic lesson in economics. First, the edict didn't address the root cause of inflation, which was the debasement of the currency itself. Simply fixing prices doesn't make worthless money valuable again. It's like putting a bandage on a broken leg. The immediate effect was disastrous. Goods completely vanished from the open market. Why would a farmer sell his grain at the official, artificially low price when it cost him more to grow and transport it? It was more profitable to let it rot in the field, or to feed it to his livestock. Merchants, facing the death penalty for selling high, but financial ruin for selling low, simply closed up shop. They stopped bringing their wares to the cities. This led to widespread shortages, which were even worse than the high prices. A massive black market immediately sprang up. People began trading illegally, in secret, at prices far higher than the edict allowed. This underground economy thrived, completely outside the government's control. The historian Lactantius, a contemporary critic of Diocletian, wrote vividly about the chaos. He described how the law led to much bloodshed over trivial items, and how goods disappeared from sale, causing scarcity to become more grievous and excessive than ever. Eventually, he says, the law, after having proved destructive to a great number of people, was from mere necessity laid aside. The government simply didn't have the bureaucracy or the enforcement power to police every single transaction in every corner of the vast Roman Empire. Imagine Roman officials trying to inspect every buckly deal in a bustling city like Alexandria or Antioch. It was an impossible task. The edict, born of a desire for order, had created even more chaos. Within a few years, its enforcement quietly faded away, and the law was effectively abandoned. But here's the important takeaway. While the edict on maximum prices was an economic catastrophe, it tells us something profound about Diocletian himself. It wasn't the act of a greedy tyrant. It was the act of a ruler, however misguided, who was desperately trying to protect the common people from economic predators. He saw a problem: rampant greed and spiraling costs, hurting the poor, and he tried to solve it directly and forcefully. His approach reveals a deep-seated belief in the state-esque responsibility to ensure justice and fairness for its citizens. He wasn't content to let the market's invisible hand sort things out, especially when that hand was strangling the life out of the empire's most vulnerable people. The edict was authoritarian, yes, but its motivation seems to have been a genuine desire for the public welfare, a term that appears frequently in its text. So, while we can judge the edict as a failure from an economic perspective, we can also see it as a reflection of Diocletian's character, a rigid, authoritarian soldier who believed in order and justice, and who was willing to use the full power of the state to impose that vision, even when it flew in the face of basic economic reality. It's a fascinating example of good intentions leading to disastrous consequences. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into Diocletian's economic reforms. I hope you found it as interesting as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. If you're just tuning in, you're about to dive deep into a fascinating, often turbulent, period of Roman history. Today, we're unrolling the scrolls on Chapter 12, Religious Control and the Cult of the Emperor. Get ready to explore how one of Rome's most influential emperors, Diocletian, tried to steer the mighty Roman Empire back to its roots, all through the lens of faith and tradition. Now, imagine this. It's the late 3rd century AD. The Roman Empire is a colossal, sprawling entity, but it's also incredibly fractured. We're talking political chaos, economic instability, and a sense that Rome's glorious past is slipping away. Enter Diocletian, a man with an iron will and a clear vision. He recognized that for an empire this vast to survive, it needed more than just strong legions and efficient administration. It needed unity. And for Diocletian, that unity was inextricably linked to traditional Roman religion. He truly believed that the old gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and the whole pantheon, were not just myths, but the very bedrock of Roman identity and power. These weren't just statues and temples. They represented the values, the traditions, the very soul of what it meant to be Roman. He saw the ancestral cults, the sacrifices, the public rituals, as a central glue holding the diverse Roman populace together. For him, honoring these gods was a civic duty, a patriotic act that ensured the gods' favor and, by extension, Rome's continued prosperity and stability. It was an appeal to the glorious past, a way to say, let's remember what made Rome great and return to it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Diocletian wasn't just a devout traditionalist. He was a pragmatic statesman. He looked around and saw new religious movements popping up, gaining traction and challenging the established order. Now, it wasn't about personal belief for him. Not entirely. It was about unity. These newer faiths, with their often exclusive demands for allegiance to a single deity, were seen as potential threats to the very social fabric he was trying to mend. Imagine trying to unite an empire under one banner, only to have significant portions of the population swearing ultimate allegiance to something else entirely, something that didn't fit into the traditional civic religious structure. Diocletian was skeptical, to say the least, of anything that seemed to pull people away from the collective identity embodied by traditional Roman religion. He perceived these emerging groups as disruptive, potentially because they didn't participate in the communal worship that symbolized loyalty to the state. He understood that allowing diverse religious practices was one thing, but when those practices actively undermined the state's efforts to unify its people under a common identity, that became a problem for an emperor striving for order. This wasn't about personal piety in the way we might think of it today. It was about political cohesion and imperial control. The state wasn't just tolerating religion. It was actively using it as a tool for governance. And then there was the cult of the emperor. This wasn't a new idea, but Diocletian really amplified it. He elevated himself and his co-emperors to an almost divine status, taking on titles like Jovius and Herculeus, associating themselves with Jupiter and Hercules. This move served several purposes. Firstly, it reinforced his authority, placing him beyond reproach and controversy. Secondly, it created another focal point for unity and loyalty across the empire. If you revered the emperor, you revered Rome itself. This cult demanded public displays of veneration, sacrifices made in the emperor's name, acts that were seen as affirmations of loyalty to the state. This emphasis on traditional religion and the imperial cult wasn't just a philosophical stance. It had very real consequences. His deep skepticism towards any movement that threatened this carefully constructed religious political unity became a foundational element of his reign. It directly set the stage for one of the most intense and widespread persecutions in Roman history, primarily targeting Christians, but also other groups that refused to conform. They were seen as obstacles to the unity he desperately sought, as challenges to the very foundation of his imperial vision. Diocletian's policies, born from a desire for stability, and a return to Roman greatness, inadvertently ignited a period of intense conflict. He saw himself as preserving the empire, strengthening its core, but in doing so, he also created deep fissures that would resonate for centuries. His actions weren't just about faith. They were about power, control, and the struggle to maintain order in a world teetering on the brink. It's a powerful reminder that history is rarely black and white, and even the most well-intentioned leaders can set off unforeseen chain reactions. Diocletian's legacy is complex, marked by both remarkable administrative reforms and severe religious repression. What do you think about Diocletian's approach to religious unity? Do you think he was justified in his concerns, or did he go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into Roman history as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow history buffs, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter. We're on a journey through the ages, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a pivotal, yet often misunderstood, moment in history. Chapter 3, which brings us to the great persecution of Christians that began in 303 CE. Now, this isn't a story of cartoonish villains or pure malice, but rather a complex interplay of power, tradition, and a deep-seated desire for stability in a vast and often turbulent empire. So, let's explore it together, calmly and factually. By the early 4th century, the Roman Empire was immense, stretching across continents and encompassing countless peoples and cultures. But this vastness came with a challenge. How do you keep it all together? How do you ensure loyalty and a shared identity among such diverse populations? This was the monumental task facing Emperor Diocletian. He was a truly remarkable leader, a pragmatic administrator who had pulled the empire back from the brink of collapse after decades of crises. He understood that a strong, unified empire needed a strong, unified culture, and at its heart, traditional Roman religion played a crucial role. For centuries, Roman religion wasn't just about worshiping gods. It was intrinsically linked to civic duty, to the very fabric of Roman identity. Performing sacrifices to the traditional gods was seen as a patriotic act, a way to ensure divine favor for the state, its armies, and its people. It was a public display of loyalty to Rome itself. This brings us to the core of the issue. Diocletian wasn't driven by personal hatred for Christians. In fact, for a long time, Christians had coexisted, often peacefully, within the empire. But their refusal to participate in these traditional Roman rituals, their monotheistic belief in one God, and their rejection of emperor worship, which was a symbol of state. Loyalty became a growing concern for an emperor trying to consolidate power and restore traditional values. From Diocletian's perspective, this wasn't about religious freedom. It was about political unity. Imagine trying to run an empire where a significant and growing portion of the population seemed to be opting out of what was considered essential civic participation. It looked like defiance, or at best, disunity, at a time when he was working tirelessly to rebuild Roman strength. So, in 303 CE, Diocletian, alongside his co-emperors, initiated a series of edicts. The first was relatively restrained, targeting Christian scriptures and places of worship. They were to be destroyed, and Christians holding positions of honor and authority were to be stripped of their ranks. The idea was to weaken the leadership and symbols of the Christian community, to bring them back into line with Roman traditions, rather than outright annihilate them. It was a calculated move, aimed at reinforcing traditional Roman identity. However, the situation escalated. Subsequent edicts became increasingly severe, demanding that all inhabitants of the empire perform sacrifices to the Roman gods. Those who refused faced dire consequences. This wasn't about torturing people for fun. It was about enforcing state policy, about demanding public conformity to traditional Roman religious practices. As a symbol of loyalty to the empire, from the Roman state's viewpoint, this was about maintaining order and divine favor for the entire populace. Refusal wasn't just a religious stance. It was seen as an act of insubordination, a challenge to imperial authority. This period, known as the Great Persecution, unfolded in different ways across the empire. In some regions, especially in the east where Diocletian and his co-emperor Galerius held sway, the persecution was intense and widespread. Christians faced imprisonment, torture, an execution for their refusal to recant their faith or perform the required sacrifices. They were seen not as martyrs, but as stubborn rebels, undermining the state. The goal was to break their will, to force them to comply, and thereby re-establish the religious and political unity that Diocletian believed was essential for the empire's survival. It's crucial to remember that this wasn't a sudden outburst of irrational cruelty. It stemmed from a profound belief that the empire's well-being was tied to its adherence to ancient traditions and the favor of its gods. From Diocletian's perspective, he was acting as a responsible emperor, doing what he believed was necessary to protect and strengthen Rome. He saw the Christians as a threat to this delicate balance, an internal division that could weaken the empire he had worked so hard to restore. The Great Persecution lasted for several years, varying in intensity and duration depending on the emperor and region. It was a time of immense suffering for many Christians, but it also inadvertently strengthened their resolve and commitment. Ultimately, it didn't achieve its goal of eradicating Christianity or fully restoring traditional Roman religious unity. Instead, it became a defining moment, a testament to the power of faith and the complex struggle between state authority and individual belief. Understanding Diocletian's motivations, his focus on political unity, his desire to restore Roman greatness, and his belief that traditional religion was central to that identity helps us see this chapter not as a simple tale of good versus evil, but as a tragic clash of deeply held convictions and imperial necessities. It's a powerful reminder of how different worldviews can collide and lead to devastating consequences, even when leaders believe they are acting for the greater good. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through such a significant historical period. I hope this calm and factual look at the Great Persecution has provided some valuable insights. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button, subscribe for more historical deep dives, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us keep exploring these fascinating stories together. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the monumental world of Roman architecture, specifically through the eyes of one of its most transformative emperors, When we talk about rulers who left an indelible mark on the landscape, Diocletian isn't just a footnote. He wrote entire chapters in stone. Get ready to explore how this incredibly ambitious leader literally built his imperial presence, reshaping cities and crafting fortresses that stand as testaments to power and vision even today. Before Diocletian, the Roman Empire was in a bit of a crisis, teetering on the edge of collapse. He wasn't just a military genius or an administrative reformer. He understood that power wasn't just about laws and legions, but also about optics. He knew that to truly project authority, you needed to build it boldly and grandly for all to see. His architectural legacy isn't just about pretty buildings. It's a statement, a declaration of renewed imperial strength and stability. From the bustling streets of his eastern capital, Nicomedia, to the breathtaking opulence of his retirement palace in Split, Diocletian's vision was monumental, quite literally. Let's start our journey in Nicomedia, in modern-day Turkey. This wasn't just some administrative outpost. Diocletian made it his primary capital in the east, and he poured immense resources into transforming it into a city worthy of an emperor. Imagine the scene: bustling construction sites, thousands of laborers, the constant sound of chisels hitting stone, and the shouts of overseers. Diocletian wanted Nicomedia to be a dazzling mirror of Rome itself, but perhaps even more efficient and grand in its own way. He didn't just add a few buildings. He orchestrated a complete urban renewal. He adorned Nicomedia with magnificent public baths, grand basilicas, and a sprawling imperial palace complex that served as the nerve center of his eastern rule. These weren't just functional structures. They were designed to impress, to awe, and to convey the sheer might and wealth of the Roman Empire under his leadership. Picture vast, colonnaded streets, monumental arches, and temples dedicated to the Roman gods, all bathed in the Mediterranean sun. Even though much of Nicomedia has been lost to time and subsequent earthquakes, historical accounts paint a picture of unparalleled splendor. It was a city built to showcase absolute power. A clear message to both citizens and rivals. Rome was beaconed. It was stronger than ever. Diocletian's architectural ambitions in Nicomedia weren't just about aesthetics. they were deeply strategic. By establishing a magnificent capital in the east, he was better positioned to manage the empire's vast territories and defend against threats from Persia. This physical manifestation of imperial authority helped solidify his administrative reforms, including the Tetrarchy, which divided the empire into 4 regions, each with its own capital. Nicomedia was the crown jewel of this new, decentralized yet unified system. He was showing the world that the empire could be strong and vibrant, even with multiple centers of power. Now, let's fast forward a bit and shift our focus to a place that many of you might recognize today. Split, in modern-day Croatia. After an incredibly long and demanding reign, Diocletian did something almost unprecedented for a Roman emperor. He retired. And where did he choose to spend his golden years? In a palace of such extraordinary grandeur that it is often considered one of the most magnificent surviving Roman ruins today. Diocletian's palace. Palace in Split isn't just a palace. It's a fortress, a retirement home, and a miniature city all rolled into one. It's absolutely mind-blowing. This wasn't just some villa. It was a sprawling complex covering over 30,000 square meters. Essentially a fortified city designed for one man and his retinue. Imagine having your own private walled city, complete with military garrisons, temples, residential quarters, and even public squares. The palace was built right on the Adriatic coast, offering breathtaking sea views and access to fresh water. Its strategic location was perfect for an emperor who still wanted to feel secure and connected to the empire he once ruled, even in retirement. The architecture of Diocletian's palace is a stunning blend of military practicality and imperial luxury. On one hand, you have massive defensive walls, watchtowers, and gates that would make any general proud. On the other, inside these formidable walls, lay a world of opulence. The Central Peresta, a grand open court lined with columns, would have been the main ceremonial space, leading to the emperor's private apartments and the Temple of Jupiter, which later became a baptistry. Can you imagine the processions and rituals that took place there? One of the most remarkable things about Diocletian's palace is how it blends different architectural styles, showcasing the innovation of its time. You see elements of Roman military camps, traditional villas, and even some early Christian basilica forms emerging, though Christianity was still nascent. The detailed carvings, the rich materials like marble and porphyry imported from across the empire, and the sheer scale of the construction all speak to an unparalleled level of craftsmanship and imperial wealth. It's a testament to how an emperor, even in retirement, still commanded immense resources and prestige. What's truly fascinating about Diocletian's palace is its enduring legacy. Unlike many ancient ruins that lie dormant, Split's palace is a living, breathing part of the city. Over centuries, people moved into the palace walls, building homes and shops within its ancient structures. The cellars, once storage spaces, now host restaurants and markets. The narrow streets, originally roomy corridors, are now bustling alleys filled with life. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where ancient history and modern life intertwine seamlessly. You can literally walk through what were once imperial chambers, and then step into a modern cafe. It's an incredible experience. So, whether it was the grand capital of Nicomedia, or the magnificent retirement palace in Split, Diocletian understood the profound impact of architecture. He wasn't just building structures. He was building an image, an empire, and a legacy. His architectural endeavors were powerful statements of stability, authority, and artistic prowess, shaping the very landscape of the Roman world and influencing generations of builders to come. These magnificent structures embodied imperial strength in every carved stone and soaring arch. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through Diocletian's architectural marvels. I hope you enjoyed learning about how this visionary emperor literally built his imperial presence. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating dives into history. Your support means the world to us. See you next time. Alright, buckle up history buffs, because today we rediving deep into the reign of an emperor who often gets painted as just a fierce military man, but was, in fact, an administrative genius. Welcome to Chapter 15. The Emperor as bureaucrat, where we unveil the true power behind Diocletian. His passion for paperwork. When we think of Roman emperors, images of triumphant generals on horseback, leading legions into battle, often come to mind. And yes, Diocletian was certainly that. He was a formidable warrior who rose through the ranks to seize control of a crumbling empire. But here's the twist. His most lasting legacy wasn't built on the battlefield, but in the dusty archives of state administration. Diocletian understood something profound. An empire, no matter how vast, cannot function on military might alone. It needs order, resources, and a system to manage it all. He believed in paperwork as much as he believed in power. Imagine a Roman Empire on the brink, decades of instability, civil wars, and economic chaos had left it fractured and vulnerable. Diocletian didn't just conquer. He meticulously rebuilt. He didn't just command, he managed. His approach was less about grand, sweeping gestures and more about detailed, often tedious, administrative reform. He looked at the Roman state not as a glorious ideal, but as a complex, sprawling corporation in desperate need of a CEO. And he was that CEO. Let's talk about taxation, a topic no one loves, but everyone needs. Before Diocletian, the Roman tax system was a mess, inconsistent, unfair, and inefficient. Provincial governors often had too much autonomy, leading to corruption and widespread resentment. Diocletian saw this and thought, nope, not on my watch. He implemented what's known as the asterisk capiteo yogatio asterisk system. Don't let the fancy name scare you. It was revolutionary. It linked the number of taxable individuals capita with the amount of taxable land. This wasn't just some arbitrary tax hike. It was an attempt at equity and predictability. For the first time in a long time, the empire had a clearer idea of who owed what and why. It required immense data collection, detailed record keeping, and constant surveys. Think about the sheer scale of this undertaking in an age without computers. Every field, every household, every resource had to be assessed. It meant sending out legions of scribes, surveyors, and officials across the vast empire, documenting everything. This wasn't just about collecting money. It was about understanding the empire's true economic capacity. It was about knowing your assets, your liabilities, and your potential. And then there were the census reforms. We often associate the census with modern governments, a tool for demographic understanding and resource allocation. But Diocletian revived and rigorously enforced the Roman census in a way that had even been seen in centuries. This wasn't just about counting heads for tax purposes. It was about understanding the human capital of the empire. How many people lived where? What were their skills? Where could they best serve the state, whether in the legions or in the fields? This level of detail was unprecedented and formed the bedrock of his entire administrative overhaul. Diocletian understood that information was power. He believed that to effectively govern such a colossal entity, you needed precise data. He created an elaborate bureaucracy to handle this influx of information. New departments, new officials, new levels of administration were established, all designed to process, store, and utilize this data. He decentralized governance by creating smaller administrative units, but centralized control through an incredibly detailed reporting structure. Every province, every region, every city had its role to play in this vast, interconnected bureaucratic machine. His reforms weren't always popular. Let's be honest. Nobody likes a tax collector, and certainly nobody likes a detailed census when it means more taxes. But they were undeniably effective. They brought a level of stability and order that had been desperately missing. The Roman Empire, under Diocletian, began to resemble less of a chaotic collection of territories and more of a structured, managed entity. He literally rebuilt the state from the ground up, not with bricks and mortar, but with scrolls and ledgers. So, the next time you hear about Diocletian, don't just think of the military strongman. Remember, the quiet revolutionary who understood the power of a well-organized spreadsheet. He laid the groundwork for future emperors, demonstrating that true imperial strength came not just from conquering, but from meticulously managing. He proved that even in ancient times, The pen could indeed be mightier than the sword, especially when it was wielded by a brilliant bureaucrat, emperor. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the administrative genius of Diocletian. If you found this dive into Roman bureaucracy fascinating, please hit that like button. Share this video with a fellow history enthusiast, and definitely subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the past. Your support helps us keep these historical narratives alive. In the long, dramatic history of the Roman Empire, filled with assassinations, civil wars, and power grabs, one event stands out as utterly unique, almost bizarre. In the year 305 CE, the most powerful man in the known world, the Emperor Diocletian, did something no emperor had ever done before, and none would ever do again. He voluntarily gave it all up. He abdicated. This wasn't a forced retirement, not a coup, not a defeat in battle. This was a choice. But why? Why would a man who had clawed his way from humble origins to the pinnacle of power, a man who had fundamentally reshaped the entire Roman state, simply decide to walk away? To understand this unprecedented act, we have to look at the man himself, the empire he ruled, and the personal toll that 20 years of absolute power had taken on him. This is the story of the emperor who quit. Let's rewind just a little. To the year 303 CE, Diocletian is celebrating his Vicennalia, the 20th anniversary of his reign, a milestone few emperors ever reached. He's in Rome, the heart of the empire he had so carefully managed from a distance. Grand processions, lavish games, and citywide celebrations are held in his honor. From the outside, it looks like the absolute peak of his power. The Tetrarchy, his system of 4 rulers, seems stable. The empire's borders are secure. The economy, while strained, is under control. Diocletian is the master of all he surveys. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Not in the empire, but in the emperor himself. Now in his late 50s, Diocletian was no longer the vigorous soldier who had seized the throne. 20 years of non-stop campaigning, endless administrative work, and the immense stress of holding a fragile empire together had worn him down. The constant travel, the weight of every decision, the ever-present threat of assassination was a burden that would crush any mortal man, and Diocletian was beginning to feel his mortality. Shortly after the celebrations in Rome, Diocletian set out for his administrative capital in Nicomedia. In modern-day Turkey, it was a journey he'd made many times before, but this one was different. During the trip, he fell gravely ill. The ancient sources are vague on the exact nature of his sickness, but they all agree it was severe. He was confined to a litter, weak and feverish. For months, he hovered between life and death. News of his illness spread, and rumors began to fly. At one point he was believed to have died, and the palace went into mourning, only for the news to be rescinded hours later. When he finally re-emerged in public in March of 305, he was a shadow of his former self. The once imposing, energetic emperor was now frail and gaunt, barely recognizable to his own court. This brush with death seems to have been a profound, life-altering experience for Diocletian. It forced him to confront the one enemy he couldn't defeat: time. He had spent his life fighting for order, for stability, for a system that would outlast him. And now, he realized that if his system was truly going to work, it had to function without him. This is where Diocletian's grand plan, the Tetrarchy, faced its ultimate test. He had designed it not just to manage the empire's vast territories, but also to solve the succession crisis that had plagued Rome for a century. The idea was simple. 2 senior emperors, the Augusti, would rule, each with a junior emperor, a Caesar, as their deputy and chosen successor. When the Augusti retired or died, the Caesars would step up and appoint new Caesars. It was meant to be a smooth, peaceful transfer of power, ending the cycle of civil war that followed an emperor's death. But it had never been tested. Diocletian knew that if he died in office, his co-emperor, Maximian, and the 2 Caesars, Constantius and Galerius, would likely tear the empire apart, fighting for supreme power. The only way to ensure a peaceful transition was to oversee it himself. He had to abdicate. He had to prove that the system worked. On May 1st, 305 CE, on a hill just outside of Nicaea, the very spot where he had first been proclaimed emperor 20 years earlier, Diocletian assembled his army. Dressed in the full imperial regalia, he stood before the legions who had followed him, who'd fought for him, and who revered him. He gave a speech, not of conquest or victory, but of farewell. He spoke of his age, his failing health, and his desire for rest after a long and arduous career. He explained that it was time for stronger, younger men to take the helm. Then, in a moment of pure political theater, he removed the purple imperial robe from his shoulders and handed it over. Diocletian, the Dominus, the lord and master of the Roman world, was now a private citizen. On the very same day, hundreds of miles away in Milan, his co-emperor Maximian, much more reluctantly, did the same. As planned, the two Caesars, Galerius and Constantius, were elevated to the rank of the system had worked. For now. So what does a retired Roman emperor do? Where do you go when you've ruled the world? For Diocletian, the answer was simple: home. He had spent years constructing a massive, fortified palace on the coast of his native Dalmatia, in what is now Split, Croatia. This wasn't just a villa, it was a fortress, a city unto itself. It was built like a Roman military camp, a perfect rectangle with massive walls, gates, and towers. But inside, it was a luxurious residence fit for an emperor, with temples, grand halls, and opulent living quarters. This palace was Diocletian's ultimate statement. It was a declaration that his work was done. He was retreating from the world he had saved, to live out his days in peace and security. The palace was both his refuge and his monument. It was here, surrounded by the Adriatic Sea and the mountains of his homeland, that he intended to find the tranquility that had eluded him his entire life. Life in retirement was, by all accounts, exactly what Diocletian had hoped for. He famously took up gardening, finding immense satisfaction in cultivating his own vegetables. There's a wonderful, possibly apocryphal, story that captures his new mindset perfectly. A few years into his retirement, the political situation in the empire once again grew chaotic. His old co-emperor, Maximian, tried to lure him back to power to sort out the mess. Diocletian's response was legendary. He flatly refused, supposedly writing back, "If you could see the cabbages I am growing with my own hands in my garden, you would not even think of asking me to abandon this happiness for the pursuit of power." Whether he actually said this or not, it perfectly illustrates the shift in his priorities. He had traded the purple robe for a gardener's spade, the fate of millions for the simple pleasure of watching things grow. He had found a peace that all the power in the world could not provide. Diocletian's final years were spent in his palace at Split, watching from a distance as the very system he created began to crumble. The new Tetrarchy quickly descended into infighting and civil war, exactly what he had feared. The ambition of men like Constantine and Maxentius proved stronger than the orderly system he had designed. Yet, through it all, Diocletian refused to intervene. He had made his choice. He had given up power, and he would not take it back. He died in his palace around the year 312 CE, having lived to see his grand political experiment fail, but having succeeded in his personal quest for peace. He remains the only Roman emperor to ever voluntarily relinquish his authority. His story is a powerful reminder that even for the most powerful man on earth, there comes a time when the burdens of office outweigh its rewards, and the most valuable prize is not a crown but a quiet life. Diocletian's abdication was not an act of failure, but perhaps his greatest and most personal victory. His magnificent palace still stands today in the heart of Split, a lasting testament to the emperor who knew when to walk away. Thank you so much for watching. Diocletian's story is one of the most fascinating in Roman history, a real departure from the norm. What do you think of his decision? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from history. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of Roman history. Today, we arrive at a chapter unlike any other. The final act of a man who held absolute power and then willingly let it go. We're talking about Diocletian and his unprecedented retirement to his palace in Split. Imagine the scene. The year is 305 AD. For 20 years, Diocletian has been the senior emperor, the architect of the Tetrarchy, a system designed to bring stability to a fractured Roman Empire. He has navigated treacherous political waters, repelled invaders, and reformed the very fabric of Roman administration. He is, by all accounts, one of the most powerful men on earth. And then he simply walks away. This wasn't a forced abdication or a coup. It was a planned, deliberate choice. A choice that baffled his contemporaries and continues to fascinate historians today. He left the grandeur of Rome and the burdens of the throne for the sun-drenched coast of Dalmatia, in modern-day Croatia. There, he had constructed a magnificent palace, a sprawling complex that was part military camp, part luxurious villa. His fortress-like retreat, with its massive walls and grand gates, would become his sanctuary. But what did a former Roman emperor do with his newfound freedom? He didn't plot a return to power. He didn't meddle in the affairs of his successors, even as the Tetrarchy he so carefully built began to crumble. Instead, Diocletian turned to the earth. He became a gardener. Picture this man, who once commanded legions and dictated the fate of millions, now spending his days under the gentle Mediterranean sun. His hands, which once signed imperial decrees, are now covered in soil. He's not inspecting troops. He's inspecting rows of vegetables. He is cultivating a life of peace, far from the chaos of the imperial court. This brings us to one of the most famous anecdotes from his retirement. Several years after he stepped down, the political situation in the empire had deteriorated. His old colleague, Maximian, who'd abdicated alongside him, was attempting a comeback. Envoys were dispatched to Split. They pleaded with Diocletian to return, to once again take up the purple robes and restore order. And here, in this moment, Diocletian gives an answer that echoes through history. He leads the envoys into his meticulously tended gardens. He gestures to the fruits of his labor, perhaps pointing to a particularly impressive head of cabbage. And he says, "If you could only see the cabbages I have planted with my own hands, you would not ask me to abandon this happiness for the pursuit of power." Let's pause on that statement. If you could see my cabbages ... It's so simple, so profound. This wasn't just a witty retort. It was a philosophical declaration. It was the ultimate expression of contentment. Diocletian had tasted the pinnacle of worldly power, and he had found something greater in the simple act of cultivating a garden. He had found tranquility. He had found a peace that the imperial throne could never offer. The palace itself is a testament to this duality. From the outside, it was a fortress, built to withstand any threat. Its southern wall opened directly to the sea, allowing for a quick escape if necessary. But within those imposing walls was a world of serene courtyards, elegant living quarters, and, of course, those famous gardens. It was a space designed for a man who understood the dangers of the world but had chosen to live apart from them. He had created his own secure, self-sufficient world. His retirement wasn't entirely without drama. He lived long enough to see the Tetrarchy, his grand political experiment, fail. Civil wars erupted as his successors vied for sole control. It must have been a bitter pill to swallow, watching his life's work unravel from a distance. Yet, he never intervened. His commitment to his retirement was absolute. He had drawn a line in the sand, and he would not cross it. When Diocletian died around 312 AD, he died in his own bed, in his own Palace of Rare Feet, for a Roman emperor of that era. He had achieved what so many others could not. A peaceful end. He chose his own exit, on his own terms. The legacy of Diocletian's retirement is as powerful as the legacy of his reign. He showed the world that there was life after power and that true wealth might not be found in gold or legions, but in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, whether that job is ruling an empire or growing a cabbage. He reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of strength is knowing when to let go. His palace at Split still stands today, the heart of the modern city, a silent stone monument to the emperor who chose a garden over a throne. Thank you so much for joining me on this reflective journey into the past. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next chapter. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of history's most fascinating and frankly, dramatic periods. We're talking about Chapter 18, the collapse of the Tetrarchy. Now, if you've been following along, we've been building up to this. We've seen the incredible vision and iron will of Diocletian, as he engineered a seemingly unbreakable system to save the Roman Empire from itself. He brought order, stability, and a new way of governance. The Tetrarchy dividing power among 4 rulers to manage the vast empire more effectively. It was a bold, innovative plan, and for a time, it actually worked. Rome, which had been teetering on the brink, found a moment of respite, a flicker of hope, thanks to this monumental reform. But here's where the story takes a turn, a really dramatic one. You see, Diocletian, in a move that still baffles historians, decided to abdicate. He voluntarily stepped down, believing his system was so robust, so perfectly designed, that it would continue to function flawlessly without his personal oversight. He thought he had built something bigger than himself, something that could withstand the test of time and human nature. He wanted to set a precedent, showing that even emperors could retire gracefully, ensuring a smooth transition of power. It was an unprecedented act, a powerful statement about the strength of his reforms. Yet, almost immediately after his departure, what he had so carefully constructed began to unravel. It's a classic tale, isn't it? The architect leaves, and the carefully balanced structure starts to sway. The initial promise of stability quickly dissolved into chaos. It turned out that the Tetrarchy, while brilliantly conceived, was incredibly dependent on one crucial, irreplaceable element: Diocletian's steady hand. His unique combination of authority, vision, and a knack for keeping ambitious men in check was the invisible glue holding it all together. Without him, that glue began to dry up and crack. What returned? Oh, everything Diocletian had worked so hard to suppress. Ambition, raw and unchecked, started rearing its ugly head among the remaining co-emperors and their designated successors. Each one believed they deserved more, that they were stronger, more capable, or simply more entitled to supreme power. The delicate balance of power, which required a high degree of cooperation and mutual respect, crumbled under the weight of individual egos and desires for ultimate control. Suddenly, the shared leadership that was meant to strengthen the empire instead became a source of intense rivalry. This wasn't just a few squabbles in the palace either. These rivalries quickly escalated into outright war. The concept of peaceful succession, so central to Diocletian's grand design, evaporated. Instead of 4 emperors working in harmony, you had them turning on each other, vying for dominance. The empire, which had just recovered from decades of civil strife, found itself plunged back into internal conflict. Legions that were supposed to defend Rome from external threats were now marching against each other, spilling Roman blood on Roman soil once more. It was a tragic replay of the very instability Diocletian had sworn to end. The beauty of the Tetrarchy was its theoretical ability to address the empire's vast administrative and military needs by having rulers closer to the action. But its fatal flaw was its reliance on the personal integrity and self-restraint of those rulers. Diocletian understood human nature, yet perhaps he overestimated how much he could engineer it out of his system. He thought the structure would enforce discipline, but ambition proved to be a far more potent force. The sheer logistics of governing such a sprawling empire meant that regional power bases quickly became personal power bases, fostering a sense of individual sovereignty rather than collective leadership. And it wasn't just the main players, their sons, their generals, their loyalists. Everyone saw an opportunity to advance their own interests in the power vacuum. The system, designed to prevent usurpation, ironically, became a breeding ground for it. Each ruler had their own military, their own courts, their own legitimacy, leading to multiple competing claims for the supreme title of Augustus. It ceased to be about effective governance, and quickly became a brutal Game of Thrones, where alliances shifted like sand and loyalty was a precious, fleeting commodity. The dream of a united, stable empire faded with each new conflict. This period vividly illustrates a profound lesson in leadership and governance. Even the most brilliant systems, the most intricate constitutional frameworks, can falter without the right human element. Diocletian was not just he was a leader who commanded respect, enforced discipline, and understood the nuances of political maneuvering. He had a way of making his courtiers adhere to the spirit, not just the letter, of the law. Without that strong, unifying presence, the structure lacked its essential anchor. It was like a magnificent ship without its seasoned captain, adrift in stormy seas. The collapse of the Tetrarchy also reminds us that history isn't linear. Just when you think a problem has been solved, new challenges emerge, often from within the very solutions designed to fix things. The ambition of men, their thirst for power, and their willingness to fight for it are constants that must always be accounted for. Diocletian bought Rome time. He gave it a chance to breathe, but he couldn't fundamentally change human nature. His system was a band-aid on a gaping wound, and once he removed his pressure, the wound reopened. So, as we look at this dramatic unraveling, it's not just a story of political failure. It's a testament to the colossal impact one individual can have, and how their absence can expose the inherent fragilities, even in the most well-intentioned plans. It's a crucial turning point, setting the stage for the next tumultuous chapter in Roman history. The empire would eventually find its way back to a single emperor, but the path there would be paved with blood and strife, a direct consequence of the Tetrarchy's implosion. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Roman history. If you found this dive into the collapse of the Tetrarchy as captivating as I did, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow history buffs, and do UNF forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you do UNF miss our next chapter. Your support means the world, and it helps us keep bringing these incredible stories to life. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most pivotal figures in Roman history, Emperor Diocletian. We're on chapter 19 of our journey, and trust me, this chapter is a game. We're talking about a leader whose reforms didn't just tweak the system, they fundamentally reshaped the Roman Empire forever, laying the groundwork for the mighty Byzantine state and influencing governance for centuries to come. Imagine the Roman Empire in the late 3rd century. It was in Charles, a period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Constant civil wars, economic collapse, barbarian invasions from every direction, and emperor after emperor falling faster than you could count them. It was a mess. The empire seemed on the brink of total collapse. Then, in 284 AD, Diocletian rose to power, and he wasn't just another emperor. He was a revolutionary. He looked at the sprawling, fractured empire and said, "Enough is enough. We need radical change." Diocletian's first, and perhaps most audacious reform was the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. He realized that one man simply couldn't effectively govern such a massive and troubled empire. So, he divided it into East and West, appointing a Coimpora Maximian to rule alongside him. But it didn't stop there. Each of them then appointed a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would eventually succeed them. This created a system of 4 rulers, each responsible for a quarter of the empire. The idea was to ensure smoother transitions of power, better defense against invasions, and more efficient administration across the vast territories. While the Tetrarchy eventually failed after Diocletian's retirement, its immediate impact was undeniable. It stabilized the empire and ended the cycle of military anarchy. It also cemented the administrative division between East and West that would eventually become permanent. Beyond the Tetrarchy, Diocletian undertook a sweeping reorganization of the empire's administration. He dramatically increased the number of provinces, breaking down larger ones into smaller, more manageable units. Why do this? To reduce the power of individual governors, making them less likely to challenge imperial authority. These new provinces were grouped into larger administrative units called dioceses, which were then overseen by vicars. This layered bureaucratic structure created a more centralized and efficient system of governance, allowing the emperor to exert greater control from the top down. This intricate administrative machinery, believe it or not, formed the backbone of the later Byzantine Empire. Economically, Diocletian also tackled the rampant inflation that was crippling the empire. He issued the edict on maximum prices, attempting to fix prices for goods and wages across the empire. Now, while this edict ultimately proved impossible to enforce and largely failed, it shows the sheer ambition of his reforms. He also revamped the tax system, making it more uniform and based on both land and population, aiming for a more equitable and predictable revenue stream for the state. This comprehensive approach to economic reform though sometimes flawed in execution, demonstrated his commitment to rebuilding the empire's financial health. One of the most significant and lasting changes was the militarization of the imperial government and the separation of military and civil authority. Prior to Diocletian, governors often held both military and civil power, which frequently led to rebellions. Diocletian stripped civil governors of their military commands, giving command to dedicated military leaders. He also greatly expanded the size of the army, creating a larger, more professional fighting force, and established a system of frontier guards and mobile field armies. This professionalization and restructuring of the military allowed the empire to better defend its vast borders and project its power. This military structure, with its clear chain of command and specialized roles, became another cornerstone of the Byzantine state's formidable defense. Diocletian also drastically altered the nature of the emperorship itself. He adopted a more autocratic, divinely sanctioned style of rule, known as the dominate. Moving away from the princeps title, which suggested a first among equals, he embraced symbols of absolute power, wearing elaborate robes, a diadem, and demanding prostration from those who approached him. This removed the last vestiges of republican ideals from the imperial office, positioning the emperor as a distant, almost godlike figure. This move towards an absolute monarchy, with the emperor as the sole source of law and authority, became the standard for the Byzantine emperors who followed. Now, let's talk about the specific legacy for the Byzantine Empire. When Constantine established Constantinople as the new capital in 330 AD, he wasn't starting from scratch. He was building on the administrative and political foundations laid by the eastern half of the empire, which eventually became the Byzantine Empire. Inherited Diocletian's efficient bureaucracy, his professionalized army, and his concept of an absolute, divinely appointed emperor. The division of the empire, initiated by the Tetrarchy, eventually solidified into a permanent split, allowing the East to develop its own distinct identity and traditions. Think about it. The Byzantine Empire, which lasted for over 1,000 years after the fall of the West, thrived on a system of centralized imperial control, a sophisticated bureaucracy, and a powerful organized military, all elements that trace their roots directly back to his changes weren't just temporary fixes. They were structural transformations that fundamentally reimagined how a vast empire could be governed. He essentially paved the way for a new, more resilient form of Roman state in the East. In essence, Diocletian took a crumbling empire on the verge of total collapse, and through sheer will and radical institutional change, he pulled it back from the brink. While some of his policies were harsh, and not all were successful, his vision for a stronger, more centralized state provided the blueprint for future Roman emperors, particularly those in the East. His legacy is a testament to the power of systemic reform and how one leader's decisions can resonate for centuries, shaping the course of history in profound ways. So, the next time you hear about the Byzantine Empire, remember, he might not have founded it, but he certainly laid much of its foundational stone. What do you think about Diocletian's impact? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more historical journeys, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Today, we delve into the life of an emperor who inherited a world on fire and, against all odds, managed to quench the flames. This is a story of Diocletian, the man who saved the Roman Empire by breaking it apart. The late 3rd century was a nightmare for Rome. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century. Imagine 50 years of chaos, emperors rising and falling like dominoes, civil wars tearing the provinces apart, barbarian invasions pouring across the borders, and an economy in free fall. The once mighty empire was on the brink of total collapse. It seemed that the story of Rome, a tale of 1,000 years, was about to come to a bloody and ignominious end. Into this maelstrom stepped a man of humble origins, a soldier named Diocles, born in Dalmatia, what is now modern-day Croatia. He was not a traditional Roman aristocrat. He was a career military man, tough, pragmatic, and incredibly shrewd. He climbed the ranks through sheer talent and grit, and in 284 AD, after the suspicious death of the Emperor Numerian, the army proclaimed him emperor. He took the more regal name. Diocletian looked at the vast, ungovernable empire and realized a fundamental truth. It was too big for one man to rule, too big for one army to defend, too big for one administration to manage. Previous emperors had tried to do it all, and they had all failed, usually ending up assassinated. Diocletian knew that trying to be a traditional, all-powerful emperor was a suicide mission. His solution was radical, unprecedented, and brilliant. In 286 AD, just 2 years into his reign, he did the unthinkable. He voluntarily shared his power. He appointed a trusted military colleague, Maximian, as his co-emperor, or Augustus. Diocletian would rule the wealthier, more stable east from Nice, while Maximian would handle the turbulent west from Milan. This wasn't a division of the empire, but a division of labor. Think of it like a massive corporation appointing to CEOs, each responsible for a different global region. But Diocletian didn't stop there. He knew that one of Rome's greatest weaknesses was the chaotic succession. The death of an emperor almost always triggered a civil war, as generals fought for the throne. To solve this, he introduced a system that would become known as the Tetrarchy, or the Rule of Four. In 293, he and Maximian each appointed a junior emperor, a Caesar, to serve as their deputy and designated heir. Galerius was appointed Caesar in the east, and Constantius in the west. Now, the empire was governed by 4 men, a senior and junior emperor in both the east and the west. This system was designed for stability. It meant there was always an emperor near every troubled frontier. If a crisis flared up on the Rhine, a tetrarch was there. If the Persians threatened the east, a tetrarch was there. It also created a clear line of succession. When the senior Augusti retired or died, the Caesars would step up and appoint new Caesars. In theory, it was a perfect, self-perpetuating machine of imperial governance, and for a time, it worked beautifully. The Tetrarchy brought an end to the endless cycle of civil war. The 4 rulers worked in concert, securing the borders, defeating usurpers, and restoring a sense of order that had been lost for generations. Diocletian wasn't just a military reformer. He was a master administrator. He completely overhauled the imperial bureaucracy, doubling the number of provinces to make them smaller and easier to govern. He reformed the tax system to create a more stable and predictable budget, tying taxes to land and population. His economic reforms were more controversial. To combat rampant inflation, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD. This decree set fixed prices for thousands of goods and services, as well as wages for laborers. The penalty for overcharging, death. While his intentions were good to stop price gouging and stabilize, the economy for the poor was a spectacular failure. A black market immediately sprung up. Goods disappeared from shelves, and the edict proved impossible to enforce across the vast empire. It's a classic lesson in economics. You can't simply legislate prices into submission. Despite this failure, Diocletian's reign was, on the whole, a period of remarkable recovery. He was a tireless builder, an effective general, and a visionary reformer. He was an autocrat, to be sure, demanding to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord Ingata, far cry from the earlier emperors who styled themselves as first citizen. He believed that the emperor needed to be elevated, set apart from the masses, to command respect and prevent the casual assassinations of the past. But perhaps the most extraordinary act of Diocletian's life was not how he gained power, but how he gave it up. On May 1st, 305 AD, after 20 years of rule, he did something no Roman emperor had ever done before. He voluntarily abdicated. In a grand ceremony, he and his co-emperor Maximian stepped down, allowing their Caesars Galerius and Constantius to rise to the rank of Augusti as planned. Diocletian retired to a massive, fortress-like palace he had built on the Dalmatian coast in Modrande Split, Croatia. He famously took up gardening, finding more satisfaction in cultivating his cabbages than in ruling the world. When his old colleague Maximian later tried to tempt him out of retirement to reclaim power amidst a new civil war, Diocletian's response was legendary. E doble wrote, Bah! If you could see the cabbages I am growing with my own hands, you would not ask me to exchange this happiness for the pursuit of power. He had brought order from chaos. He had held absolute power, and then he simply walked away. In the end, his perfect system, the Tetrarchy, did not long outlive his presence. Human ambition proved stronger than his carefully crafted rules, and the sons of the emperors soon plunged the empire back into civil war, from which Constantine the Great would eventually emerge as the sole ruler. So, was Diocletian a success or a failure? It's a paradox. His system for succession collapsed, but his administrative and military reforms were so profound that they laid the foundation for the next phase of Roman history. By dividing the empire's administration, he created the framework for what would eventually become the separate Western and Eastern Roman empires, the latter of which, known as Byzantium, would survive for another 1,000 years. Diocletian's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, to save something, you must be willing to break it. He was not a man born to privilege, but a soldier who saw a world crumbling and had the audacity to rebuild it on a new foundation. His legacy isn't one of glorious conquests, but of pragmatic, difficult, and ultimately successful preservation. He was the emperor who divided to preserve, the autocrat who chose humility, and the man who proved that the ultimate power is the power to let go. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you next time.